Intimate Judaism deals with sensitive topics and uses explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Intimate Judaism. I'm Talli Rosenbaum.
And I'm Rabbi Scott Kahn. Today we have a special guest, Shoshie Goldstein, who will talk to us about the difficult but important topic of divorce.
You might think that it's ironic that on Intimate Judaism, we're having an episode on divorce, but it is a fact of life. Some couples do get divorced. And what we're really interested in doing is talking about when that's necessary, but also how to do it in a way that doesn't mean failure or high conflict necessarily, but ways that you can navigate a divorce with compassion, with integrity, and with cooperation.
We'll get to that conversation in just a moment. First, please check out our website, intimatejudaism.com, for the full podcast archive, show notes, a free men's mikveh checklist, and more. Subscribe to Intimate Judaism wherever you get your podcasts, rate and review, and leave a comment. We're also working on additional projects so that Intimate Judaism can expand its reach further. Make sure to tell people, therefore, about this podcast and share it as well so we can continue to grow our audience. Check out the Intimate Judaism community on Facebook. The Intimate Judaism community is a safe space where we can discuss intimacy and healthy sexuality in the context of Jewish family life. An extension of this podcast, there we address challenges and candidly offer solutions while remaining within the bounds of Torah and Halakha. Those who prefer to do so may also post anonymously. So go there today, the Intimate Judaism community on Facebook. You can find the link in the description of this podcast. And now, Talli, let me introduce our guest. Shoshie Goldstein is a practicing mediator and toenet rabbanit based in Tzfat. Originally from Chicago, she made Aliyah in 2002 and has over 3 decades of experience in adult education and as a dedicated classroom teacher. She later transitioned into legal advocacy and mediation, bringing her profound background in education and cognitive behavioral therapy into her legal practice. Today, she uses her extensive expertise to provide empathetic, structured, and effective guidance to her clients. Beyond her professional achievements, Shoshie is a proud wife, mother, and grandmother. She's especially proud of her 3 children who serve in the IDF, reflecting her family's deep dedication to the country they call home. Shoshie Goldstein, welcome to Intimate Judaism.
Thank you for having me.
Shoshie, I'm going to jump in and start with the first question. Thank you for being here. We've interacted a little bit in the past, and I've been very impressed with you and your work. And just listening to your bio, you wear so many different hats. I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do specifically, what a toenet does, especially since many of our listeners are not in Israel, and I'm not sure that there's such a concept in other countries. So please tell us a little more about yourself.
So I'm a toenet rabbanit and a mediator, as you said. A toenet rabbanit is an advocate in the rabbinical court, in the Beit Din system, in the official Beit Din system of the rabbinate, and also I can represent in private Batei Din, private rabbinical courts. So I basically do what a lawyer does, but with a twist. And this is a license, and you have to be admitted into the bar. So a lawyer looks at the law, right? And usually a rabbi will look at the halacha. So a toenet, though, is at the crossroads of both. Okay, so I'm looking also at halacha and also at family law in Israel. And that's what the toenet does. And I mostly do divorce cases. I would say 90% of my business is divorce, and 10% is fights between neighbors over building, over damages, and things like that. And maybe a little bit less, because I do have a lot of slander cases too as well. So that's what I do. And then most of my cases, though, thank God I'm able to mediate. And we never actually have litigation. We just go together to the Beit Din to finalize the divorce and the agreement.
First of all, thank you for all that. It sounds like you have a background in law and you're a mediator. It also sounds like you're a little bit of a halachic expert in certain areas. You're a teacher, I understand, a little bit of a social worker because you also have a good understanding of psychology. You studied cognitive behavioral therapy. It seems like you have a lot of different roles, and it's likely that you integrate them in your work.
It's complicated because the way one time I met somebody who she's written many, many books about marriage. And I was really excited to meet her. I read her books. They're really great books. And she asked me, what do I do? So I said, well, I kind of do the opposite of what you do. I kind of do hospice end-of-life care for marriages. And when a marriage is ending, and that's what, divorce is. And by the way, all marriages end, right? All marriages end either in divorce or in death, right? So of course, we believe that, the souls are still connected, but all marriages end halachically, okay? In or in death or in marriage. So to premature death of a marriage, right, which would kind of look like divorce, needs a lot of care. So even though I really try to create boundaries where I don't like to get into the therapeutic part with my clients, I'm going to get there anyways, because I'm the one who's holding their hand. I'm the one who's walking them through the process. When they get a bad decision, if we're in litigation, I'm the one who has to help them understand that this is what the situation is, and we're going to have to adjust. There's a lot of, it's a very emotional roller coaster. Even if the parties want to get divorced and they both, this is from their own will, no one's forcing either one or challenging the divorce, it's still a huge, huge step. And it's a very difficult process.
It is. I just want to say one thing as a therapist who does work with couples and who does kind of like the opposite of what you do, that sometimes we actually do what you're talking about. In other words, there is a role for couples therapists in helping couples, what we call uncouple, and what comes along with that. And often it really is a process of mourning, because it is like death. You are mourning the end of something. And often it's a process of towards the end, and it can take some time, of acknowledging what this marriage was, and even wishing the best for one another, also defining what roles we can have with one another. Not every couple can do that, unfortunately, and some of them really are going to be enemies and are going to have, just as they had a very high conflict marriage, will have a high conflict divorce. But sometimes divorce can be a very healing process.
Absolutely. In fact, the Yiddish word for divorce is ois chasna, which means uncoupling, right? And it's a great word. And I actually experimented once. I asked clients of mine who had done a divorce mediation, and I had read a lot about uncoupling. I said, could our last mediation session be an uncoupling session? I said, I'm not going to charge you because I really have no idea what I'm doing, but let's see, maybe we could, part in a nice way. So I prepared a lot, and it was unbelievable. They looked at each other, and I said, okay, can you just take turns thanking each other for the good parts of the marriage, right? And say it like, because not everything is black and white. Not everything is all bad. There has to be some good. Even in really bad marriages, you did decide to get married. So there must have been 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something when you became parents together, something there that was good. And we had this session, and we kept it short, 10 minutes. And that was it, which was enough, because I really had no idea what I was doing. And I was scared to ruin the moment also. Like, here they're able to, and they canceled their divorce, actually. And they got back together, and they got back together for 4 years, and then they divorced. But what's the but? They divorced in a nice way.
Wow.
They didn't tear each other apart. There was not 1 minute of litigation. And it was okay. We put in our best. We'll always respect one another, and we'll always be co-parents together. And that's it. It's just, we need to move on.
Very meragesh.
I'd like to ask about that concept of uncoupling and how it jives and works together with Jewish values. And the reason is that the idea of a get, it's called a sefer kritut in the Chumash, and that means, according to Chazal, it's something which cuts them off from each other. It has to be something which actually ends the relationship. I realize that halachically we can have some sort of relationship. No one's saying they can never talk to each other. But in terms of pure Torah values, the idea of really being separated completely from each other's lives seems to be implicit. And halachically, that's also implied in other ways as well. They're not supposed to really live near each other. Although, again, halachically, there are all sorts of nuances. I'm putting this in very broad terms right now. And practically speaking nowadays, based on what I see in the Shulchan Aruch, it actually is almost entirely fine for them to live near each other because we no longer live in small villages. So therefore, assuming they're not in a tiny moshav with just a few people, then they would be allowed to live near each other, though perhaps halachically not in the same building.
Right. So that's the halacha psuka. The halacha psuka, the halacha says that they cannot live in the same entrance. Okay. I actually have a case of this now where we'll see what happens. I don't want to give too many details. I have to do a follow-up on what happens before I get the psak, just in case the other side is listening. But you have the halacha, which says they can't live in the same entrance, okay, or in the same courtyard in the olden days, the terms of the olden days. So does that mean kritut in everything? In my opinion, it's a little bit of an extension. The cutoff is their souls are no longer intertwined. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that they are not connected financially, and that they are not connected in any sexual relationship anymore, which includes they can't have yichud together. And if they do have yichud, if they are secluded under the conditions of yichud, they need what's called a get l'chumra, which is a second get. And it happens all the time. And this is one of the reasons why the Beit Hadin is not so into nesting, which is super popular in the United States, which I happen to think is a great way to transition. It's not a long-term solution, okay? Because if you remarry, you're not nesting, right? It's a little bit ridiculous, but it's a great way to ease the children into the concept of what their new family structure is going to look like.
Can you just explain to our listeners what nesting means before we go forward?
Okay, so nesting is, instead of the children ping-ponging between the parents after the divorce, the parents ping-pong. So you have the family house, and then either the parents share together a small apartment when they're not the parent on duty. We don't use the word custody anymore in Israel. Okay, that word was banned from the dictionary because custody implies ownership of a thing, and children are not things, they're people. And there's no ownership of people. There's parental responsibility or the parent on duty. That's the language that the court wants us to use. So the parents alternate, okay, just like the mother and father bird alternate watching the eggs and the chicks. So it's a great way to ease into a new family structure. And I actually had a few agreements that I mediated where they were going to nest. And I'm not going to say I was the first because I don't know if that's historically accurate, but I was definitely one of the first mediators or toanot who got an agreement of nesting authorized by the Beit Hadin, because some of the dayanim were saying, wait a second, they're going to end up being in seclusion, they're going to have yichud, they're going to need to get l'chumra, they're not going to know, they're going to, the whole thing. So I wrote it out in the agreement that they're aware, that they know what this is. And it's a great arrangement. It can only work though for couples who have uncoupled, who are very attuned to the other person's boundaries. They are able to set their own boundaries. They're respectful. Otherwise, it's a disaster. But it's a great short-term solution. Going back to your question, I personally think that it's impossible to sever ties from somebody completely, and that the halacha obviously doesn't ask that, because the halacha is very clear that we always do what's in the best interest of the children, okay? Which is something which was clarified by the Ridvaz, which is a long time ago. So the best interest of the children is not that their parents be enemies. The best interest of the children is that when a child has a chalaka, a 3-year-old haircut for the first time, or a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah, that the parents can make an occasion, a simcha together, that they can both show up, that they can share birthday parties, that they're going to be grandparents together, right? Bezrat Hashem. So there has to be there always will be some kind of connection. It is impossible. So instead of, having this wall, right, of saying, okay, we're never going to interact and we're not going to talk to each other again and we're going to be enemies, I think it's much, and again, only healthy people can do this, or semi-healthy people. You have to make it work. You have to make these things work because that is what is good for your children.
Well, let me ask a question about that, because obviously the children have to come first. I don't think anyone would doubt that. That's the most important factor here. In the context of taking care of the kids and having this positive or compassionate type of situation, a compassionate divorce of sorts, is there possibly a negative consequence on that couple's future relationships with their future spouse, with their second marriage, for example? Now, obviously that does not have to happen, but I wonder if at times it can be difficult for a couple which is divorced but has a friendly relationship to find new people because they're still so intertwined with their original spouse. Is that an actual problem, or is that an imaginary problem?
It's a great question. And I think it boils down to boundaries and health and clarity. So a person, I would say the opposite, someone who has a really bad relationship with their ex, you want to put a question mark and say, why, right? You're divorced. Why do you still have a bad relationship with them? Why are you still in that loop? And I think the word is remuneration, right? And I think I'm pronouncing it wrong. But you keep going back into all of the hurt and all of the pain. A healthy person, okay, I'm not talking about abuse right now, okay? Let's put that on the side because that's a different category, okay? But when the marriage just didn't work out for various reasons, minor mental health issues, even moderate mental health issues, but not abuse, okay? Why can't you have a good relationship with them? Why can't you coordinate with them? So sometimes it is the fault of one particular parent who's not able to do that. But sometimes it's both of them. And that, if I was looking, into somebody, checking them out for a potential match, I'd want to know why. Why are you so stuck? Why can't you have a good relationship? I think that when children don't have a good relationship with both parents, that's a huge question mark on why they don't. What has the parent who they have a good relationship done to possibly spoil the relationship with the other parent? It doesn't mean that that's what the story is. Okay, I'm not saying that that's always what it is and everyone should always have good relationships. And it's always, I'm not blaming fault here. I'm saying these are question marks which need to be explored, because a healthy person, and the healthier we get and the further a person moves away from the divorce, the better they should be able to communicate with their ex. And that's really a sign of health. So I think that is what will allow them to build a good and healthy relationship with a potential new partner.
I appreciate that answer very much. I think that when people are dating for their second time around, one of the questions is often, what's your relationship like with your ex? And when somebody comes and says, oh, I hate her and she's terrible and just talks about, then, there is kind of this question mark there that is not necessarily there when somebody says, oh, we work things out and we try to keep things cordial. And I appreciate what kind of a mother she is or he is, or father. I'm listening to the conversation between the two of you. And also I'm looking at you. Scott introduced you as being a proud mother of 3 IDF soldiers, which many of our listeners will say, well, what's that big deal about? If you were seeing us right now on video, you would see that you are a Hasidish looking woman. And so it's not so taken for granted. The reason why I'm asking about that is that my assumption is that you're working in the spectrum, and that you deal with very, very Haredi, Hasidish, and all kinds of couples. And I do as well. Not looking like you, but I also do. And what I have found is that what you're presenting, this idea of conscious uncoupling, divorce with integrity, it was introduced by a Western society, a culture that looks at divorce not as the destruction of the temple, not as something that is so deeply shameful and full of stigma. It looks at divorce as often part of life. And what we're talking about here is taking those values and integrating them with what you were talking about, Scott, about the kritut, how that sounds so final and so negative. And what I'm wondering about is, traditionally, have you seen changes across Orthodoxy, even Haredi? I remember a time where I was told that in the Haredi world, if a man and a woman divorce, they never speak to each other again. And oftentimes the father is not involved anymore. Maybe he would see his kids once a year. And I wonder if you could speak to how open the more traditional parts of Orthodox society is to this idea of being able to communicate with your spouse? Is there stigma even around that? Or are they told that you're not allowed to?
So I'm going to answer the question, but I'm speaking only from my own experience, right? These are not, I never did a poll or scientific research on this. This is just from my own experience. So it's probably a little bit more narrow than if you'd ask, 10 different people who work as professionals in this sector. A lot has changed and a lot has gotten worse. A lot of it has changed for the positive. You definitely have a higher amount of Haredim who are getting divorced. If you look at the statistics, the change from 2023 to 2024 to 2025, I'll get to 26 in a minute. From 23 to 24, the divorce rate increased in Kiryat Sefer, Beitar, and I'm going to say put in Beit Shemesh there, which is, I think we could safely say, is now a predominantly Haredi city. Most of those cities increased by 50%, and Bnei Brak. Okay, there was a huge jump. Now it lowered in 2026. 24 to 25, it went down. 26, we don't know yet. But there was a huge, that's huge, 50% in 4 cities, 3 of which are Haredi, and one of them is predominantly Haredi. Jerusalem has the highest amounts of divorce in the country. Okay. Now, of course, there's the highest amount of marriages in Jerusalem also. Okay. So might get balanced.
Do you mean the highest percentage of divorces or the highest number, pure raw number?
The highest number.
Because Jerusalem is about twice as big as any other city, so that's not so surprising.
Right. The highest number of divorces from people who live in Jerusalem. There was almost 700 divorces in 2025 from people who live in Jerusalem. That's a lot. The Jerusalem Beit Hadin, they could write an average of 12 gittin a day. Like that's of the days that they're open. That's insane numbers. Okay. And I spend a lot of time in the Beit Din in Jerusalem. A lot of Haredi people, you see people from Toldot Aharon getting divorced there. It's very different than what it was 10 years ago, even 7 years ago, even 6 years ago. So people are definitely more apt to get divorced. I heard this great idea from the Lubavitcher Rebbe of why from divorce has skyrocketed. And this is, the Rebbe has passed away 30 something years ago. So this was a long time ago. And he said that our souls are souls which are more connected to Geula, to redemption. And therefore, these Geula souls, with a heightened awareness of Geula, of redemption, they're not satisfied with just having a marriage which is on paper. It's a marriage which is a contract. I'll provide for you X, you provide for me Y. But these souls are seeking intimacy. They're seeking peace. They're seeking a real partner. And therefore, people are not satisfied anymore with just these contractual arrangements of marriage. And they want a real marriage with feeling, with love, with intimacy. And I think that's true. I think that people today are not willing to just say, okay, we're married because I didn't want to be alone. I don't want to be alone in my marriage either. The socioeconomic has changed greatly, where you have a lot of cases, and this is certainly true in America, from what I understand, where you have women paying men alimony. Okay. And even though in Israel we don't have alimony, I don't want to give away my trade secrets, but there's ways to get alimony under the table or around through the back door, as we say. So women are not dependent on men for income, certainly not in the Haredi world, where women are trained and primed to be the main breadwinners. So what do you need a man if he's only providing parnasa and he's not providing? I can do this on my own. So you definitely have an easier way of getting divorced. On the other hand, though, and I think this was the second part of your question, Talli, was the role of the father after the divorce and the relationship of the couple. There is a horrible phenomenon going on right now, which is, I think, one of the worst things in divorce. And it is more predominant, again, from my experience only. I'm not saying this as a ironclad rule or fact, but I find that it's more predominant in the Haredi world, and that's parental alienation. Where in the Haredi world, there's a huge stigma of getting divorced, even though more people are doing it. Nothing has changed in that. And in order to find positive judgment in the courtroom of the kahila, of the society, a person has to kind of prove, with bringing all kinds of evidence, that the other party was abusive, mentally ill, is a pedophile, right? Like, lay it on thick, because I have to prove that it wasn't my fault, that I'm the good guy here, because there is still very much this, well, who ruined the marriage? It can't be that just two people didn't get along, right? There has to be a villain here. Very black and white thinking, and who's to blame? And people ask me this, like and of course, I can't talk about any of my clients, and I won't, but the question that people say, who's to blame? What do you mean, who's to blame? Like, when people get married, does anyone say, well, who's to blame for this, marriage? Who's taking the credit for this marriage? It was him or it was her? Two people decided to get married. And it really is the same thing with divorce also. It's not one or the other. And what happens is very often in the Haredi circles, one of the parents decides that they have to prove to the rest of the world in order to get remarried, in order to remain part of society and have a good name in society, because that's, one of the highest values in society is a good name, that the children have to only be with them and not have a relationship with the other parent, because that proves that they're a good person and they were the good parent and they were abused. And it should be criminal. Parental alienation should be part of Dinei Onshim, criminal law in the penal code, because it's a horrible thing. It's abusive to the child, let alone to the parent, but it's a horrible crime, in my opinion. And this is where I think that divorce is really in danger. And that families, that when we talk about high risks of divorce, this is it. It's the parental alienation.
I want to get back to the stigma question, Shoshie, because you mentioned before a few minutes ago that in Jerusalem, the number of divorces is about 700 annually, at least it is right now. And it is a high number. At the same time, Jerusalem has about 1 million people. Admittedly, not all of them are Jewish, but about 1 million people. And I just did a quick check. And in the United States, according to the CDC, right now, there are about 2,400 annual divorces for every 1 million people. So that still remains less than a third the number of divorces in American secular society. So obviously, even though the divorce rate is going up, it has not reached anywhere near the numbers that we see outside of the Jerusalem area, let's say, in the non-Jewish secular world, let's say. And my question is this: is the fact that at least outside of Israel, let's talk about the non-Jewish world where divorce has become very prevalent, the stigma has really gone away in large part. And obviously, we don't want anyone to be stigmatized. However, is it possible that the ease with which people can get divorced and the lack of stigma might sometimes cause couples that could work it out, which obviously probably would be better for the kids if it's not a terrible marriage, and then they just say, let's just get divorced. That's easier because it's so little stigma. So my question is this: without asking anyone to be stigmatized, is there a place to say that there should be more reluctance to get divorced in some situations if the marriage can be salvaged, or is that something which is misconceived?
So first of all, I just want to mention about the statistics that you shared. In America, the past 2 years, divorce has declined. Okay, which sounds, wow, people are getting divorced less, but it's actually not true, because people are getting married less. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that in Jewish society, the divorce rate is going up. So even though and in secular society as well, and I want to explain something about Israeli society, which our listeners outside of Israel might not understand, and that is Israel is a very family-oriented society. People come as couples, they have children. In other Western cultures, having children is maybe, we'll think about it like it's a discussion, like, do you want to have kids? Do you not want to have kids? Amongst Israeli families, and I'm talking about across the board, secular families as well, kids is a given. Right? If someone doesn't want to have, and even homosexual couples in Israel have 2-3 kids, that's normal. People have kids here. It's a very child-oriented society. And it's a very couple and family unit-oriented society. Okay? So living in that society, the fact that the numbers are going up for divorce The stigma is still there. It's very hard to live in any Israeli society as a single parent. Lahavdil, alfei havdalos, right? I'm not comparing it at all, but the women whose husbands have been in miluim, in reserve duty, for hundreds of days now, and they're holding down the fort. We're seeing a lot of collapse of those families. Okay, those women are basically they're in a worse position actually than single mothers, because they're also worried about their best friend, beloved spouse on the battlefield. But they've been holding down the fort, and the stress, we're seeing the results of the stress. So I don't think that people are encouraged by society to get divorced. I would say 85% of the couples or clients that I have ever facilitated a divorce for, they had to get divorced. Like, there was no question. And in fact, I think more people actually need to get divorced. And they lie to themselves about, oh, I could take it, I could handle it. I'm going to wait till the kids grow older, and all those things when they're suffering tremendously and there's no reason to suffer. So the stigma, on the one hand, yeah, it shouldn't be easy to get divorced, but it's not easy to get divorced. It's not easy without the stigma to get divorced. Put in the stigma, and it's really, really hard. It's really hard. I don't think that most people do that. I think that people want to save a marriage. There's a lot of shame involved, even self-shame in the dissolving of a marriage. It's something that I find across the board. Almost all my clients have to deal with is the self-shaming part. A phrase that I say over and over again is, you don't need anyone outside of you to abuse you. You're abusing yourself, right? And I'll say to my clients, imagine if someone spoke to your child the way that you're speaking to yourself now, right? Imagine your child's teacher said those words that you just described yourself to your child. You would call the principal, you'd have them fired. So there's a lot of Jewish guilt that's involved in getting divorced. And I think most people, 85% of the people that I deal with, are doing it as like they should have done it years ago. And it's a last result. I rarely have clients or deal with couples who they could have made it. It happened to me maybe once or twice, and then there were certain nuances that I couldn't pick up, but they had their reasons. I really trust somebody who comes to me and says, I need to get divorced.
Okay, thank you.
I understand where your question was coming from also, Scott, in the sense that there is a tendency to be defensive. We want marriages to last. And look, we're here on Intimate Judaism, and we talk about all the ways to enhance intimacy and relationships and communication. And I love what you said about what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, because people are not willing to live without intimacy, to live in contractual only relationships. And that's why the Rebbe himself talked about the importance of Mishichat Halev in dating, having an attraction to the person, feeling that you could really have a romantic want to be with that person. And that really brings me to the cultural piece here, because until today, they do have 2 15-minute bishos, and people are still getting married to one another without the benefit of being allowed to create an intimate relationship of any sort, even the basic emotional intimacy. I will have people coming in telling me stories of how they were not allowed once, they met one time or 2 times, and they were not even allowed to interact with one another. And basically, we had an episode on forced marriage, and we've talked about this before. So I want to talk about, I'll tell you why, and I'll finish with this. I was on a podcast a while ago, a more yeshivish podcast, where they asked me to talk about early divorce. And the other people, rabbanim, they talked about how people today, they want, immediate gratification, and they don't want to work on anything anymore. They just think that, something doesn't work, something doesn't look nice, it's broken, you replace it. They were really giving the impression that divorce is a failure. And it's not. And that's why I said, look, first of all, we're not Catholic. There is volumes of Gittin so that we know that it is an option. But also, we can't create the issue and then go ahead and stigmatize people for not feeling that they can be with this person with whom they weren't even allowed to build anything with. And so, yeah, I was hoping you could maybe comment on those.
It's interesting because intellectually, when I think about it, it's quite insane you're going to take these two 18-year-olds who don't know anything about anything, put them together and say, stick on a sticker, just married and goodbye. Like, what on earth is going on here? So I think the word is an interloper, right? Someone who came in, and in Yiddish it's called an Eingekimmener, right? A newbie to society. It's beyond shocking, and it doesn't make any sense. Okay. And it doesn't make any sense to us because we were raised in a very Western society. No matter how sheltered or not sheltered we were exposed to a lot of different ideas, and we're basically groomed. Like if you look at Disney, right? Disney also has this, sale of what love is supposed to look like. And almost all movies, right, have some scene in them where there's love at first sight. And that's a big thing in Western civilization and culture. So on the one hand, it doesn't make any sense to us. On the other hand, it's kind of similar to what's being sold in other cultures as well. However, though, the fact that, and this is something which tell you, I don't understand how it works, why it works, but it does. And I think part of the reason why it works is, and this is a huge benefit to the Haredi lifestyle, especially in Israel. One of the benefits, right? I'm not saying the only benefit, and I'm not saying there's other deficits, but one of the benefits is that if you have somebody who really doesn't have expectations, they don't know. They haven't been exposed to other love stories. They don't know what it's supposed to look like. They don't know. They have no clue. And then they meet somebody, right? Or they're introduced to somebody, or they're told that this is pretty much who you're marrying, which is, in general, that's not really how it works. There is somewhat of a choice. Again, the choice is a limited choice. And there's not a lot of space for a really deep choice, but they build it together and they decide together, and they get a lot of guidance in most groups, right? Most Hasidic groups, they have a lot of guidance before and after, and there's a family unit there that's there for support. And in a very high percentage of these couples, they have decent to good marriages, which is pretty impressive, because I'm not sure that in secular society or in religious society or in yeshivish society, they have who date for a long time and sometimes live with each other for long periods of time before they get married. Do they have a higher success of having moderate to good marriages? I look at from my husband's side, my husband grew up in Bnei Brak on Rehov Rosenbaum 24, which is, anyone knows Bnei Brak? That's what he calls the Kaspa of Bnei Brak. That's the heart of the hardcore. My mother-in-law is a survivor, but my father-in-law his parents were some of the first people who moved to Bnei Brak in the times of the Chazon Ish and the Stipler. My father-in-law printed the books of the Stipler. So that's really hardcore Haredi. And I have, bli ayin hara, over 150 nieces and nephews who are all super, super Haredi. And I don't really know all of them. Don't ask me to tell you all their names, but it's amazing how I watch them get married. And I'm always wondering at their weddings, this is crazy. They don't know each other, what? And somehow they develop these, again, I'm not saying they're all happy and thrilled, but most of them seem, again, it's from the outside, but outside with the critical eye, who I'm always trying to figure out, are they happy? Are they not happy? Do they need a card? What's going on there? It works. And they build families together. And it's interesting how and again, I'm an observer. I like observing people. Okay. It's interesting to me to see how this works. My next degree is going to be in sociology. So I like to watch them. I like to watch how they interact with their spouses in the beginning, as time goes on. And it's a good thing that none of them speak English, so they don't know this. If they listen, they're not going to listen to this podcast. And it's very interesting how each couple kind of develops their own language of intimacy and romance. And for one of them, for some couples, It's, you see her flirting with him, she'll start flicking her shaitel or something. And like, you see she's vying for her husband's attention. And sometimes it's him making her a coffee or carrying up the stroller or, these little things, but it's very interesting to see how they develop intimacy with no connection to the outside world or other couples, which is something, honestly, I'm jealous of. It would be nice to erase a lot of expectations, scenes, ideas that I have, of what, marriage is X, Y, and Z, right? Intimacy is X, Y, and Z. Doesn't have to be. It has to be what the couple created. And that's the bracha we bless a couple under the chuppah, that they should be happy like Adam and Chava in Gan Eden. Well, besides for the fact that there were no in-laws in Gan Eden, and that definitely added to their happiness, it's just them, just the two of them. There was no one to compare and contrast.
Okay, Shoshie, I want to get back to a question about kids and the messaging we give kids. And I'll preface this by saying that one of my favorite comedians is someone named Zach Galifianakis. I don't know if you or Talli know who he is, but he's a very funny comedian in the United States. He has had a fake talk show called Between Two Ferns, where he would interview celebrities. It was not real. But I remember in one episode, he talked to Brie Larson, who's an actress, and he said to her, "Your parents got divorced when you were 7 years old. Was that your fault?"
Ooh.
It was a joke. Don't worry.
Most kids do believe that the divorce.
That's exactly what I want to ask right now, because obviously the joke there is that that's an absurd thing to ask. It's an absurd thing for the child to think. And yet, obviously, many children, as you just said, Talli, do believe that. So, Shoshie, I want to know that when a couple is getting divorced, and let's hope that's a healthy, compassionate divorce, what is the appropriate messaging to their children they should tell them? What do they need to tell them so that those children don't internalize a negative message?
It's a very complicated question because it depends on the child, right? You have to get into your child's mind. So for there's no typical child. Every child is, chanoch lemar al pi darko. Each child is so different. And one of the things, though, that I think is very important is the parents have to be on the same page. The parents, and not every parent can do this, and not every couple, I should say, and it's not right for every child. But the best thing is to have a meeting with the family, with both parents. I tell the parents, if it's possible, I said, sit close to each other, right? Don't be on opposite sides of the room. Sit close to each other, sit close to your children, and explain to them that and you're going to have to be a broken record on this. This is our decision, and you have to keep them out of it. Because the minute you expose your child to any terms of your divorce, you are bringing them into that place of guilt and into the conflict of loyalty. And that's the worst thing that a parent can do to a child. Divorce doesn't harm children. What harms children is the way that parents get divorced. Parents who have children on the spectrum, parents who have teenage children and are getting divorced, you have to really get into their minds. And you have to understand that they're going to, a teenage child is going to have a tantrum. And you have to realize they're right for having a tantrum. You are messing up their life, okay? So give them that space and understanding, and don't say, oh, it's going to be okay. You're just going to have 2 houses. It's like when you take your kid to the dentist, right? Now, oh, it's not going to hurt. Oh, shut up. It's going to hurt, right? And when I took my kids to get their shots when they were little in Tipat Chalav here in Israel, so the nurse always says it's not going to hurt. And I used to tell my kids, it is going to hurt, but you can handle it. My youngest daughter, I used to say to her, it's going to hurt, but you have 5 older brothers. You can take it. You can handle this. And that's the message we want to get. It's going to hurt. Don't tell your kids it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. Lying to children is I think it's a horrible thing. You might as well tell them that Santa's going to, or the tooth fairy, okay? Tell them the truth. It is going to hurt. This is going to be difficult, but we're going to do it together. Get them the outside support they need.
The one question I would have when you say, no, it's not going to be okay, I would think that the message would be, it is going to be okay. It's going to be different and it's going to hurt, but it's going to be okay. You said it's not going to be okay. I'm wondering if that nuance matters.
I think it does. Because it's never going to be okay. Being okay is Abba and Ima, mom and dad, sitting at the same Shabbos table and having a Seder. It's not okay to have to go back and forth between parents like that. And I think that's the parent saying, we're not okay for this and putting you through this. It's something we have to do, but it's not okay. I mean, I think it's lying to a child to say that it's going to be okay, because it's never going to be okay. This child, and I know this, I've experienced this, is going to get married, and it's going to be complicated having two divorced parents, and they're going to have to coordinate a lot of things themselves that normally parents do for children. And even if the parents have a great relationship, it's never okay, right? Mom and dad living together, that's okay.
It's so important, because when we feel guilty, we become defensive. And what you're saying is that you guys have to work on your own self-compassion, your own permission, your own understanding that this is what you needed to do. And then you are going to be far more equipped to deal with your children with validation, with, yes, I know this decision has really upended your lives, and that it is never going to be what you would have dreamed for it to be. And it's so validating to hear your parents say, we get it for you. We get that this actually is really, really hard. And not, it's going to be okay, and you're going to see, and you're going to have this wonderful life here and a life here, because that really does minimize the pain, the upheaval. And so I think that was a very good point that you didn't back off on, Shoshie. You said, no, for the child, it's never going to be okay. And just trying to be machazik and give encouragement. It's not about trying to convince them otherwise. So thank you for that. And now we sort of have to wrap up. I guess I would just, for the last question, we're talking about, there's so many things to talk about here, obviously, but we are talking about divorce as sometimes being a necessary thing that has to happen. And we're talking about transitions, changes in the family structure, changes in the couple, because the couple is now going from being spouses to also being lifelong partners, but in a different way. Lifelong co-parents, co-grandparents. And I'm wondering if you could just say briefly, how do they transition into that? What are the ways to transition into that with as much dignity and compassion as possible in these very difficult, conflictual situations? I mean, it's a divorce, it's a conflict.
Right. So let's break it down into two different types, right? You have the dignified divorce, where both parties came to the mature conclusion that being together is not good for either one of them, and that they need to move on. And then you have the high conflict divorce, which usually involves either someone with mental illness or some kind of personality disorder, which is mental illness, or there was adultery there, infidelity, those kinds of difficult high conflict divorces, or abuse. Okay, so in the second, we'll do the second one because that's the harder one first. There, it's very complicated, because you're talking about, let's say, for example, a woman who was abused during the marriage, and very often a man could abuse a woman, but not the children. So he's still going to get joint custody, okay, because he was never abusive towards the children. I'm not getting into, is that right, is that wrong? That's the facts. That's what happens today, both in the family court and in the Beit Hadin. So he has half custody, and you got to coordinate things together. I had a client whose ex-husband was in jail, but he was still the legal guardian of the children. So when she wanted to take the children, for example, to a therapist, she needed his permission. So could you imagine, I actually had two clients whose ex-husbands were in jail. So could you imagine co-parenting with somebody who is in jail? Very difficult, okay? Very, very difficult. How do you even have a conversation with somebody, and they both were in jail for heinous crimes? How do you co-parent with them? How do you, when they get out of jail, come to the same bar mitzvah? Bar mitzvahs you can make two, right? Weddings, you can't make two weddings. Very, very complicated. And it takes, and you said this, Talli, it takes a tremendous amount of inner work to be able to know that right now I'm not in danger. Know that right now I'm okay. We're separated, but for the sake of my child, I am going to have to interact with this person, but I'm going to make very, very clear boundaries. One of those boundaries is, I always tell my clients, give them a piece of advice. When you're talking to your ex from category 2 of the high conflict ex, pretend that you work in customer service. okay? And he's a Karen or she's a Karen, okay? And you have to always answer politely, but you never actually give them what they're asking for. So they want to return, a half-eaten cookie, right? Because the cookie wasn't tasteful and they want a full refund on it. So you have to constantly say, I hear what you're saying. I'm sorry the cookie wasn't to your liking. I'm sorry I can't refund your money. So it's the same
a great
thing.
deal of emotional regulation.
A great deal of emotional regulation and a great deal of being very focused on keeping your boundaries and not stepping out of them. Because with a lot of these people, the minute you give them a finger, they'll take your whole body. And you'll just end up, and also a very important thing is many people who were married to category 2 people are very used to taking control over the situation. And they have to take a lot of steps back. And this is really hard. And this is why a lot of people don't get divorced, because they lose a tremendous amount of control. So you want your kids to brush their teeth every night, but you know that your ex could care less about oral hygiene. When the kids are by the ex, you don't text. Remind the kids to brush their teeth. Remind the kids to brush their teeth. You don't call the kids. Remind them to brush their teeth. And this could be, hatek hadbek, cut and paste on a million other issues. When they're with their other parent, they're with the other parent. You have to step back. You can't give the other parent advice unless they ask you. And even though and this I find with a lot of mothers who they're used to being a full-time mother and now they're only part-time mother, very, very hard adjustment. But with category 2 people, the minute you step into their space, you're stepping out of your space and inviting them to be a space invader. And they know how to invade spaces very well. So there's the mosquito and there's the fly. The mosquito stings. The fly is annoying. So you got to think of them as a fly. It's an annoying thing that I got to deal with, but it's not dangerous.
Shoshie Goldstein, thank you very much for everything that you taught us today. This was very, very interesting, and we appreciate your joining us today on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Tell us about the podcast that you host.
So I host the podcast, Divorcing with Dignity, where we discuss all kinds of issues that divorce brings up, a lot of co-parenting, and a lot of dealing with a co-parent who's a narcissist or with some kind of personality disorder, and helping our children get through that.
Thanks. It was a great pleasure to be a guest on one of the episodes of your podcast.
That was my most popular podcast. Got the most views.
Great.
Check out intimatejudaism.com, join the Intimate Judaism community on Facebook, and listen to Intimacy and Sexuality for Emerging Adults, powered by Intimate Judaism, and we will see you on our next episode.
Thank you. Bye.